Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those who are the first time here, my name is Zach. I'm 22 years old Russian who left Russia because of the war against Ukraine. And today is a really specific video about a really interesting figure of Russian politics, Dmitry Anatolievich Medvedev. Ex-president of Russia, the person who used to eat burgers with Obama in America, the person who got a gift from Steve Jobs and it was iPhone 4, one day before it was even out for sale. The most famous liberal among Putin's people, who unfortunately after the start of the war against Ukraine became the most vocal fascist/Z among all the Z people in Russia. The biggest enjoyer of vodka among all Russians, the person who says that Ukraine is part of Russia and threats everyone who dare to support Ukraine. Dmitry Anatolievich Medvedev. Before I tell you how he became the biggest liberal of Russia at first, the president of Russia, and then the biggest fascist of Russia, I want to tell you a little bit about his biography. So Medvedev was born in Leningrad. For future references, Leningrad is how Soviets used to call St. Petersburg. Yes, they literally called St. Petersburg Leningrad in the name of Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Communist Revolution. Anyway, so Dmitry Medvedev was born in the year of 1965 in Leningrad in the family of two professors, so in some kind of intelligentsia family. He was a really good kid, no conflicts at school, good marks, all the teachers complimented him and it was all fine. When he was in his teenage years, he was really into rock music. One of his favorite bands were Deep Purple, with whom he actually later will meet in person when he's gonna be a president of Russia. Also, he really liked Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. Listening to that music, Dmitry Medvedev would also do weightlifting. In 1990, Medvedev finished Leningrad State University and his major was law. While being in university, Medvedev also joined the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, but unfortunately, or actually I think luckily, he wasn't a communist officially for a long period of time because already in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. So eventually Medvedev was a communist only for a couple of years. And to be fair, many people joined Communist Party just to get a promotion at work or, good marks. So we can't really say if Dmitry Medvedev believes in communism or not. I actually think no. In 1988, Medvedev, being a grad student, started to teach law for bachelors and even participated in writing a textbook for bachelors too. Interesting fact, but after receiving his grad education in Leningrad State University, he couldn't find a job as a lawyer. I mean, it was a USSR, so not many lawyers were actually needed outside of the government especially. And he was working as a janitor for some times. So just an interesting fact. Medvedev also hasn't served in the Soviet or a Russian army, conscriptional service. That's what I mean. And it's actually quite interesting because in Russian society, it's often referred to being not a man, not a true man, if you have not served in the military. And Dmitry Medvedev himself, the person who's going to threaten the whole world with nukes and say we're going to invade every single country, he actually never served in the military himself. While he studies in Leningrad State University, Medvedev met Anatoly Sobchak, and eventually this acquaintance would become the life changer for Dmitry Medvedev. Anatoly Sobchak was one of the teachers who actually taught civil law at the University of Medvedev, and what's interesting that 2 years before Medvedev got into university, Anatoly Sobchak was teaching the same subject to Vladimir Putin, and I hope he already started to build a connection. After the collapse of the USSR, Medvedev, instead of going to the streets and trying to sell anything, as actually most of the professors and most of the teachers after the collapse of the USSR would do, he was lucky enough to know Anatoly Sobchak, who was trying to get elected into the parliament of Leningrad. A grad student, Dmitry Medvedev, with other students, would go around the city and post campaign posters for Anatoly Sobchak. After Anatoly Sobchak was elected into the local parliament of Leningrad, he made Medvedev his advisor. Another person who teamed up with Anatoly Sobchak was, guess who? You're right, Vladimir Putin, who just came back from East Germany and couldn't find any job. And so he had to, get out his connections from his previous life from university. And eventually he called his professor and asked if he has a job for him. And, Anatoly Sobchak decided to take Putin into his team. 1 year later, in 1991, Anatoly Sobchak becomes the mayor of St. Petersburg. And of course, his advisors, Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, got a rise. Now they are not just advisor of some local deputy. Now they are advisors of the mayor of the city, of the second biggest city in Russia, that actually used to be a capital in the times of the Russian Empire. Anatoly Sobchak made Putin a chairman of Committee on Foreign Relationship of the mayor office of St. Petersburg. And many other people are actually asking, why did he make Putin a chairman of that organization rather than Medvedev, for example? But I think it's really, kind of simple. It's just because of the age, basically. At that time, Putin was about 39 years old, while Medvedev was only 26. So, 39 just sounds better for that type of a position. And I'm saying that type of a position, but what actually the committee did, the Committee on Relationships of just the mayor's office, and I think you would think like they wouldn't really play a huge role in politics, but eventually what they did led Putin towards his presidency. In 1991, St. Petersburg and the whole country was going deeply in the swamp of a food crisis. People just didn't have enough food on the shelves to buy. People were starving. The whole world was trying to help Russia, the United States included, and the Committee of the Foreign Relationships of the mayor's office of St. Petersburg were supposed to solve this problem. They were supposed to exchange the resources that were left after the USSR, like the resources such as wood, such as metal, such as some, gold or something else, in exchange of food, and eventually get it to St. Petersburg so people would not starve. And as I told you, Putin was a chairman of that organization. However, not everything was great with the work of committee. Putin was the chairman of the organization, as I said to you. And Putin understood quickly that he can make a lot of money signing the contracts with companies from Finland, from Germany, and actually sell them resources way cheaper than the market price and get a percentage to himself. One of the investigations later shown that Putin reduced the real price of resources up to 50%. And of course, some of those percents would go directly to Putin's account. Later, there was a whole investigation actually created not by the police, but by the parliament, the local parliament of Leningrad, of St. Petersburg. And there they claimed that Putin stole a lot of money, that police should investigate this, and then they should fire Putin from the chairman position of the Committee of Foreign Relationships. However, since Sobchak, the person who actually hired Putin, who got him into this position, he was against that decision. He was trying to hide that his workers, members of his team actually did something wrong. They did an act of corruption, basically. And that's why no investigation was made because of that. And because of that, Putin is actually continued to go up on the hierarchy of politics and eventually became president, and I'll tell you why. And you may ask, how is Dmitry Medvedev related to all this story about the Foreign Relation Committee of Mayor's Office of St. Petersburg? And I'll just simply reply to you that he was an advisor of Putin in that organization. And he was responsible for all the paperwork related to law, and basically he did all the law side of the job. And imagine there is a lot of law work out there. And of course, Medvedev knew all the corrupt schemes Putin was using to get a lot of corrupt money to himself. And of course, Medvedev did it, and so it really made them kind of like friends who did the same crime. So it kind of made them closer to each other. At the same time, when Medvedev got some money from somewhere, he buys 20% of shares of one of the paper creating factories, which was called Ilim. There is a really interesting story. The work in the Foreign International Committee led Putin to become a president later. How? Well, here's the story. At that time, in the 90s, Boris Yeltsin was elected as a president of Russia. He was a president. Russian economy during his presidency was falling apart. It was a really huge food crisis. Not only food crisis, any kind of products were not available for purchase on the shelves. And so Yeltsin comes to St. Petersburg just to see how things are going out there. And he would often go just to a random city without, giving a notice. He will come before. And he came there and he was expecting to see empty shelves in St. Petersburg as in the rest of the cities in Russia, as in Moscow. And surprisingly, you've seen the food on the shelves. You've seen the sausages, you've seen the cheeses, you've seen the bread. And, Yeltsin was surprised. How so? We don't have all that in Moscow, in the capital of Russia, and you have all that in St. Petersburg. And eventually he asked mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. And Anatoly Sobchak was proudly saying, well, that's my boy Putin. That's the guy who works as a chairman in the Committee of International Relationships, and he trades all this food with other countries and basically gives them resources in exchange. And even though Putin stole a lot of money doing that, but still it was a smart move. None of the other cities did not do that, and nobody actually came up with the idea that they can exchange, not to sell, but exchange that food. And eventually, this is what led to that food on the shelves in St. Petersburg. So I think kind of rang the bell in Yeltsin later, when in 1996, Anatoly Sobchak lost his elections to be re-elected as a mayor of St. Petersburg, and basically Putin lost his job. Another guy came to power and put his own guy. And so Putin was thinking, where should he go? And I think he reached out to Yeltsin, and Yeltsin was like, oh, are you that guy who actually provided food for St. Petersburg and you got so much? I think you are a smart guy, so why didn't you come and work in my president administration? And eventually Putin goes to work in president administration. He moves to Moscow from St. Petersburg. And guess what? He calls his friend Dmitry Medvedev, who used to work with him and who used to do all this dirty work in this international committee, doing all those corruptional schemes. And of course, he offers him a job as his helper or advisor in the presidential administration of Yeltsin. Later, Putin becomes the head of the FSB, basically the ancestor of KGB, and he makes Medvedev one of the most important people in the presidential administration. Later, Yeltsin is going to feel bad. He's going to resign. He's going to say, "Я ухожу," which means I leave. And at that time, Yeltsin said that the person who is supposed to take my position as a president before future elections is going to be Vladimir Putin. I trust him, he's a good guy, he's going to be a good president until new elections. And guess who becomes the prime minister and the head of the government? The little friend of Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev. However, Putin was taking the position of a president instead of Yeltsin only before the next elections, which happened in the year of 2000. And when Putin was also running his campaign, guess who was the head of his campaign? His little friend from St. Petersburg again, Dmitry Medvedev. And later, once Putin was elected as a president, Dmitry Medvedev became the head of the government again and the prime minister. So you already see this duo going right from the scratch. Those days, Medvedev was helping Putin to take control over Gazprom, the biggest gas company in the world. And you know what? Medvedev was made a chairman of the board of directors of Gazprom, even though he literally had zero experience in the gas sphere, in the sphere of resources. But still, Putin needed his person in Gazprom whom he actually could trust and who could do whatever Putin says to do. Since 2003 up to 2005, Medvedev was the head of the present administration. So basically, he was working under Putin. However, since 2005 and 2008, Medvedev was taking a little lower position. He was managing the priority national projects, which were appointed by the president. So here it comes to the story how Putin decided to make Medvedev a president. Yes, he literally decided to put a guy who used to be in his shadow, who used to be basically a clone of him and would do anything he'd say, a president. And he did it. Why? Because Putin needed to somehow scam the system, scam the constitution. Because constitution prohibited a person to be elected as a president for more than 2 terms in a row. And one term was 4 years, so Putin was elected in the year of 2000. 2000 plus 4 means 2004. Then there were another elections in 2004. Putin was re-elected and he was a president up to 2008. However, he couldn't continue to be re-elected in 2008. And he needed someone, because constitution prohibited, and he needed someone who would take his position, who would be basically the chairholder of his presidency. And guess who was the perfect fit for that position? A little friend of Putin, Dmitry Medvedev. Just think yourself, Putin and Medvedev knew each other from the 1990. And what's more important, they didn't have any conflicts. They didn't have any contrary in their relationship. And Putin was even thinking and choosing between 2 successors. First, we already know Dmitry Medvedev, but the second one was Sergei Borisovich Ivanov, an old friend of Putin from KGB. And at some moment, Ivanov was even more popular. He got 19% of viewers or people's sympathy, while Medvedev only had 18. However, Medvedev was more favorable candidate just because, well, firstly, he didn't have any connections to KGB, and at that time, it was more of a disadvantage rather than advantage. Not nowadays, actually. And at the same time, he was more liberal, he was more pro-Western. At that time, the society wanted to see that type of a person leading the country, and Putin was pretending to be one, and Medvedev, he was that type of person, a pro-West person. The choice to make Medvedev the successor, the president of Russia, was made by Putin already in the year of 2005. Because since 2005, the all-controlled media, TV channels owned by the government started to make different news reports about how good Dmitry Medvedev and how great he is in, solving some problems, working in the government. And just, his face started to appear more and more often on the TV. People didn't know who was Dmitry Medvedev back in the year of 2000 or 2001. People would not even care about that guy. At the same year, at the year of 2005, the electoral website of Dmitry Medvedev was created. In 2007, Putin gave a speech in support of candidacy of Medvedev. As for the candidacy of Dmitry Anatolievich Medvedev, I have known him very closely for over 17 years, and I fully support this candidacy. The political parties United Russia and Just Russia, which were kind of the same party and under the same control of the same guy, of Putin, they were actually taking the majority of the seats of the parliament, which were exactly 72.0%. They said that they support the candidacy of Dmitry Medvedev, and the Just Russia decided not even promote their own candidate, because Dmitry Medvedev was such a good guy. Moreover, the candidacy of Dmitry Medvedev was supported by the Russian Orthodox Church, which is like the monopolist on religion of Russia, and also the head of the Muslim mosques, the Islam in the western part of Russia. They support Dmitry Medvedev, and also the Jewish communities of Russia also support the candidacy of Dmitry Medvedev. So the government did everything to make Medvedev a president. Almost no one were allowed to participate in those presidential elections in 2008. Those names who a lot of Russians heard a lot, who used to be puppets of Putin and who used to play opposition inside of the government. This is Zyuganov, who is a communist and who used to be just a communist who would never criticize his opponent Putin. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, an ex-KGB agent who used to, during the KGB times, used to play opposition, and he continued to do the same. And just one no-name guy, Bogdanov. Nobody even knows that guy. The real oppositionists were just rejected to be registered and to be eventually elected as a president. For example, Garry Kasparov, a famous chess player, Vladimir Bukovsky, the Soviet dissident, lawyer and writer, the ex-prime minister of Yeltsin era, Mikhail Kasyanov, all of them were rejected, not even come to the real elections, but even to register as a candidate. 2nd of March 2008, Medvedev won the elections. He got 70.28% of voters and eventually becomes a president of Russia. About 14 million of votes for Medvedev were fake. It was proven by one of the researchers of statistics and math, Sergei Shpilkin, who was actually in 2023 recognized as a foreign agent. So basically, he just criticized the government and was doing a great job. So that's like an honor nowadays. So he claimed that by his statistics, and he actually proved it in his mathematical model, that about 14 millions of votes were just fake, and they were of course painted over the real result of Medvedev. Let's speak of Medvedev as a president of Russia. So he was taking the position of the president since 2008 up to 2012. He is the youngest president of Russia because at the moment when he was elected, he was about 42 years old and also 7 months old. Those times, people were thinking that Medvedev is a really pro-Western person. They were thinking that Medvedev sees Russia as a part of a civilized Western world and not like a separate civilization as Putin used to refer to Russia describing our society. I remember when I was about 14 years old, I was scrolling through YouTube and I found that video of Linkin Park playing live in Moscow on the Red Square. And I was really amazed, wow, foreign band, such a cool one, were allowed to play at the Red Square. And it happened in the year of 2012. So at that time, Medvedev was showing how liberal he is, how pro-Western he is, how he loves everything foreign. And I remember I told you that he was a fan of rock music. And later Medvedev was actually saying that his son used to listen to Linkin Park. And because of that, I guess, Medvedev allowed them to perform at the Red Square. So that video of Linkin Park playing at the Red Square was actually the first video I've seen in my life, some foreign bands playing music at the Red Square. However, later, in 2013, when Putin became president back, he prohibited all kind of musical festivals or musical performances on the Red Square, unless it's a specific occasion. Or for example, this video from 2010, when Dmitry Medvedev was eating burgers in some burger place with Barack Obama in DC, and they are just sitting there as, regular people, not having tons of security, tons of FSB around as Putin used to do when he's going out somewhere to the public. And people were thinking, hey, look at this, just two presidents, a president of Russia and a president of America, sitting there just, chatting as, as friends, eating their burgers, and everything is fine. The world becomes a safer place, no more confrontation between two countries with the biggest nuclear weapon resources. Or another video when Medvedev was traveling through the Silicon Valley and he got to meet Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs actually gave him away, basically made him a present, an iPhone 4, and the iPhone 4 was not even allowed to be sold in the US at that time. So Steve Jobs gave him the phone that was not even released yet as a present. And here you can see how Steve Jobs was showing that the functions, the FaceTime for the first time to Medvedev, and Medvedev was as happy as a child would see a new toy. And I remember how people were just really smiling those days, looking at those videos and thinking like, hey, this is the friendship Russia and US needed. The world is different right now rather than in the USSR. After Medvedev visited Silicon Valley, he was really inspired by all the high tech. And once he came back to Russia, he decided to create our own Silicon Valley. And eventually, they just got a piece of land outside of Moscow in the Moscow Oblast, so-called Podmoskovia. And over there, they decided to make this specific zone with specific laws and regulations that would allow some startups and some innovations to grow and develop. A lot of governmental money was invested in that. But just a quick spoiler, eventually all the money was stolen by all of those people who were pretending to make it business and eventually just losing the money and taking them somewhere like offshore. And eventually it was a really big failure for Medvedev, but Medvedev was trying. And overall, Russians remember the presidency of Medvedev as good times. The GDP during his presidency, so since 2008 up to 2012, grew by 50%. Medvedev also made the procedure to open a business easier, so basically giving more freedom to business. Russians also remember him by this phrase, freedom is better than non-freedom. He even criticized Stalin, which was, such a good sign for liberal people of Russia, and actually quite a bad sign for all those ashy communists who were still nostalgic about the USSR. However, the rule of Medvedev was not perfect. In 2008, Russia waged a war against Georgia, the country that used to be a part of the USSR, but that got its independence in 1991, and since nowadays, 20% of Georgia is occupied by Russia. This war only lasted for 5 days, and Russian tanks were 20 kilometers away from Tbilisi, the city I actually used to live for a long time, and the city that actually hosted me for a long time. And still, up to those days, this war is greatly remembered by Georgians. After the war, Medvedev also raised the military budget up to 29%. However, let's think, was Medvedev really independent in making his decisions in politics? Some people, and I actually tend to believe that in inner politics, Medvedev was quite independent, and Putin gave him the freedom of, doing some better things for business, doing some innovations, which were actually later cancelled by Putin. What came to the foreign politics, it was mostly controlled by Putin. For example, many people say that the war of 2008 was actually triggered by Putin and not Medvedev. Medvedev used to be quite a peaceful guy who never would work in law enforcement. He didn't even serve in the army, as I told you. And the next KGB, Putin, was more likely to start a war, especially since there was a personal conflict between Putin and the president of Georgia at that time, Saakashvili. So Putin didn't really lose his power at those times. As soon as Medvedev became a president in 2008, Putin was made a prime minister. And so many people understood that the real power is actually in Putin's hands, while Medvedev is being a president. And one moment I remember, there was a funny moment at the TV show when Medvedev was supposed to go out to the scene, and the host of the program was calling out, and today, right now, the president of Russia, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and then understands, oh, it's not Putin, it's actually Medvedev, and changes. Look at that.
Президент России Владимир Дмитрий Анатольевич Медведев.
Here is another proof that during presidency of Medvedev, Putin was still the first person in the power. And this proof is a TV show created by Putin in 2001 and called Direct Line with Vladimir Putin, in which the president answered questions in real time. Putin did this show every year of his presidential term from 2000 up to 2008. Political technologists tried to show ordinary Russian that the president is really concerned about their problems. As the real leader of the country, he can solve them. And I guess you might think that since this TV show shows ordinary Russian how the president solves real problems of Russians, and when Medvedev becomes a president, he will be the host of the show and he will be answering people's questions, Russians' questions. But no, still, when Medvedev was a president, that TV show was still hosted by Vladimir Putin, and Putin, being a prime minister, was still answering the questions, and of course it was made just because Putin didn't want to lose his rating. And of course it was made just to show to the people who is the real person who solves people's problems, and to get Putin's rating higher, or at least it will not go down and people will not forget about Putin. In 2007, Putin created this plan of changing the constitution and specifically the presidential terms, and he made this task for Medvedev to implement those changes into Russian constitution. That's why in November 2008, basically not a long time ago, when Medvedev just became a president, not even a year passed, Medvedev gets that project of a law to change the constitution and to let the next president, which is going to be elected after Medvedev, to serve as a president not for years, as the original constitution of the year of 1993 states, but 6 years. And as we know later, Medvedev will just not even participate in the elections. And it was all made so Putin later would not have to think for an extra 2 years about this, changing places with someone else. But I will make a quick spoiler for you. In 2020, Putin just changed constitution. There was a referendum, but most of the referendum results, in my opinion, are fake. And again, there is some statistics researchers who actually proved that the results are fake. And because of those changes in constitution, Putin is allowed to be a president up to 2036. But coming back to Medvedev, in November of 2008, he got this initiative to be put into the parliament, and already in the end of the November of 2008, the constitution was changed. And actually there was no referendum, it was only made inside of the parliament, which was totally controlled by the party United Russia, basically Putin's and Medvedev's party, who were taking most of the seats in the parliament. By the way, at the same year, at the day of constitution, when Medvedev was giving a speech, one of the listeners, a young guy, a student actually, he screamed shame on the changes of constitution, and because of that he was later kicked out from the hall. This guy was Roman Dobrohodov, who later created the media The Insider, which I actually like, and I really recommend you to read it if you know Russian language. In 2009, Nikolai Petrov, who was one of the researchers of Carnegie Foundation, said, "What we're seeing now is a dominant role of Putin. We're seeing him a real head of the state. This is not surprising, we still live in Putin's Russia." But what did ordinary Russians really think at that time? Who were, in their opinion, ruling the country for real? One of the Levada Center's surveys in 2009 showed that Russians believe that Putin is the one who leads the country. Only 11% of those surveyed believed that the real power belongs to Medvedev, while as many as 32% believe that power belongs only to Putin. The remaining 50% believe that the real power belongs to both of them. Putin prohibited Medvedev to be re-elected in 2012, and everyone understood it right away after Medvedev, instead of his candidacy, said that he supports the candidacy of Putin as a future president. After that, it just became obvious that Dmitry Medvedev was just a pet servant for Putin to avoid the constitutional prohibitions. Putin and Medvedev literally scammed everyone. Western leaders, while negotiating with Medvedev, were thinking that he is the guy who makes decisions. He is the guy to whom we should speak to. He is the boss. While he was not. And Russian people who were spoken about the political competition, the modernization of economy, and, just the life, they were all scammed. It was all just a big lie. Because once Putin came back, he cancelled most of the reforms of Medvedev, most of the projects of Medvedev, and eventually the whole direction of Medvedev's inner politics. There is a theory that says Putin wanted to let Medvedev to be re-elected for the second term. However, he totally changed his decision because of the Libya. So basically, I think it was 2010 or 2011, in United Nations, they were thinking if countries of United Nations should intervene into Libya and to overthrow the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, and eventually Medvedev said that yes, and Russia voted yes in the decision of UN Council. And Putin later said that it is now right, it's like going on crusade, we should not intervene. So basically Putin was protecting Muammar Gaddafi for real. And Medvedev was later replying to Putin, not directly, but just, answering to one of the journalist questions, saying that it is not a crusade, it is actually a real civilized decision, because people of Libya needs our help. And because of that, I think Putin understood, okay, this guy, if he's going to be the president for the second time, he's going to do all the crazy stuff I don't want to be done from the Russians' name. And that's why Putin didn't let Medvedev to be re-elected for the second time in the year of 2012. After Putin became a president in 2012, Medvedev was still taking the position of the prime minister, and most of the people were saying that basically he does nothing over there. He just drinks a lot of alcohol, having a lot of problems. And some people say that it was actually the reason why in 2020, Medvedev had to resign from the prime minister position, and his whole government was also resigned. And most of the people say it happened just because he had some alcohol problems. And so eventually this so-called tandem of Putin and Medvedev, when one is a president and the second guy is a prime minister, fell apart. Since then, Medvedev doesn't have any real power in the country. He was created this position of a chairman of Security Council of Russia, not even chairman, but the advisor of the chairman. So he doesn't even have people whom he can command to do something. So it's just a title, basically. It's not a real power. At the same time, he's the head of the main party of Russia, United Russia, which is used to be a party of Putin and Medvedev, and he is still head of this party. But this party is not like in Western countries where there is a real competition and those are real political parties. No, this party is just kind of like a test. If you want to show your loyalty to the president, if you want to show your loyalty to the regime, you just got to become a member of the party. It's kind of like with the Communist Party, to be honest, in the Soviet Union. If you wanted to get a promotion at your job, if you wanted to get into the government, you just had to be the part of the Communist Party. You just couldn't do all that without being a part of it. So for the last 12 years, Medvedev was not really doing anything in government. Yeah, he was taking the position of the prime minister up to 2020. Basically, he does nothing. I think he just drowns himself in alcohol. And there is a lot of proofs of that because on every public conference or Putin's giving a speech or somewhere else in public events, when Medvedev is a listener, he just falls asleep right away, and people actually think it's because he has a severe hangover every time. And just in general, his face looks really unhealthy, and just people think that, there are many rumors that Medvedev has a lot of alcohol problems. In all those years after presidency, Russian people only remembered Medvedev for a couple of things: him playing badminton, the Navalny's investigation about the corruption, about his elites, mansions, castles, Italian wineries and yachts, and of course to his legendary speech to the retired people in Crimea. I think it was something about 2018 or 2017, when he came to the occupied Crimea and all the babushkas were angry at him and because their pensions were really low. And one of the babushkas were saying like, hey, I can't even buy groceries, my pension is not enough. And what he said that, I'm sorry, we don't have money, but you guys survive.
Просто денег нет. Значит, найдем деньги, сделаем индексацию. Вы держите здесь, вам всего доброго, хорошего настроения и здоровья.
So again, after Medvedev stopped being a president, he started to drown himself in alcohol. And because of that, I think he's still out there, like in this alcoholic period of his life. Because how else would we describe what he writes in his social medias about the war against Ukraine? Since the invasion of Ukraine that started in the year of 2022, Medvedev absolutely changed his persona from a so-called liberal to the most cannibalistic fascist of Russia that goes with the most fearful statements that even Z people are kind of afraid of. Here, how he explained the aggressive statements of his towards everything Western. I hate them. They are bastards and geeks. They want to kill us, Russians. And as long as I'm alive, I'll do everything to make them disappear. Oh, боже. Medvedev became the member of the so-called Party of War, the most fearful supporters of the war, who used to include Kadyrov, Prigozhin, Volodin, the head speaker of the parliament, and those other people who are saying that we need to continue the war with Ukraine till the end, basically. At the platform for his statements, Medvedev decided to pick Telegram, and in his Telegram he has something about 1 million subscribers or even more. While Putin is publicly rejecting that the main goal of the special military operation is to occupy Ukraine, Dmitry Medvedev in June 2022 he just said, and who said that in 2 years Ukraine will be even existing on the map of the world. Or for example here, Medvedev just thinks that Ukrainian ethnicity and identity is just a huge fake. Medvedev also says that there is a war between West and Russia, and this war is religious. He said that by starting the fight, we gained the sacred power. We are listening to the words of the Creator. The goal is to stop the supreme ruler of hell, whatever the name he uses, Satan, Lucifer, or Iblis. Moreover, he called all the Russia's enemies, oh my gosh, it's gonna be a funny one, a bunch of crazy Nazi drug addicts, barking dogs from the Western kennel, and a mismatched pack of grunting piggies. Jesus. 16th of December 2022, the ex-president Dmitry Medvedev claimed that the civilic infrastructure is a lawful military target. According to Medvedev, the civilian infrastructure contributing to the achievements of the military goals includes bridges, transport stations, roads, energy facilities, factories, and workshops. Among other legitimate military goals, Medvedev named the military political leadership of the enemy country. Medvedev stands out with his ultra-right position, even among the most Z people out there in Russia. In April 2023, because of UK put sanctions on some people who were affiliated with the case of Vladimir Karamurza, the quite famous human rights defenders in Russia, Medvedev just fiercely stated, "I don't care about their decisions. Britain has been, is, and will be our eternal enemy. In any case, until their brazen and nasty damn islands goes into the depths of the sea from the wave created by the latest system of Russian weapons." I guess you're thinking why the thumbnail for this video has so much bottles of vodka on it. And it's quite simply explained, just because of the society, Russia kind of thinks that Medvedev's actually writing all that in the middle of the night when he is drinking his lonely bottle of vodka on himself with no companions, and then he gets extra powers that I guess alcohol gives to him, a lot of people, to write all those crazy posts. Because how else would you explain that on the 1st of August during the night on his wiki page, not on Telegram page, he got a post that Kiev is soon going to be captured by Russia, Russia is going to restore its borders, that the borders of Russia never finish, Russia is like borderless basically. He also said that the country of Georgia, like the independence of Georgia, never existed, Kazakhstan is a artificial state, and eventually in the morning this whole publication was deleted. And Medvedev said, "Oh, somebody just scammed me, somebody hacked my account and wrote all this, it was not me." But I think there is a different reason for that. And I guess understand what is it. It's a bottle of vodka. 8th of July 2023, Medvedev written about Biden. "Maybe the dying grandfather, obsessed with unhealthy fantasies, just decided to live beautifully, provoking a nuclear Armageddon and taking half of humanity with him to the next world." Also, in August 2022, Medvedev went to the occupied territories and eventually to Luhansk region, and he went there just to describe security, but who the hell is he to discuss security? He's not a military guy, he never even served in conscriptional service. So he just went there just to kind of show off, just to see people, yeah, like, those my statements is just not a drunk text, I really care. By the way, the son of Medvedev, actually quite a funny character, because Medvedev gave him so much money because he felt like he's the second Steve Jobs, and he's gonna invest in a bunch of startups and become a really famous investor and just, quite a famous geek guy, but eventually lost all the money that the father gave to him, and none of the projects where he invested got actually successful. And so eventually he asked daddy to put him somewhere else. And so that's why I think in the year of 2022, he became the coordinator of the project Я в России, which means I am in Russia. This is a project that basically provides governmental services of Russia to the occupied territories of Ukraine. A lot of people, even among my anti-war friends, still cannot understand why such a liberal person, such a pro-Western person who used to eat Big Macs with Obama, who used to be happily getting a present from Steve Jobs and looking at the iPhone so happily, the person who used to host Linkin Park concert at the Red Square, why nowadays he became literally the most vocal Z-fascist of Russia? How and why? So there are actually two versions, which I tend to believe, so I'm going to tell you about them. Does Medvedev believe what he writes about? That's a good question, and the first version says that he does it because he used to be known as the most liberal person among people of Putin. However, nowadays, it's not really a good trait. While everything Western in the country is being prohibited, while there is such an anti-West culture and propaganda, and during those days, you don't want to be that famous liberal guy. And that's why Medvedev needs to prove to Putin and to the rest of the Z people that he is with them. He is our guy, Z guy, so he has to do all those cannibalistic statements just to show and eventually kind of save himself from the persecution from either Putin or the audience. The second version, which I actually tend to believe more, that this whole thing is kind of ordered by Putin. And you would ask why? Why would Putin order Medvedev do such cannibalistic statements? Well, people nowadays, while $1 costs about 100 rubles, while economy is literally like going down day by day, while things are getting worse and worse, people tend to compare how they were living during the presidency of Medvedev. During the liberal times, $1 was about only 30 rubles, 30. And of course, they would say, oh, Putin is not a good president. So the rating of Putin is going to go down and the rating of Medvedev is going to go up a little bit. And so that's why Medvedev is afraid to become too popular comparing to Putin. And this is why he has to do all those crazy statements so ordinary Russians would just think, oh, okay, Putin is, at least he doesn't say about this saint war and Iblis and Satan and nuking Germany and Berlin. And eventually something like that happened to Sergei Furgal, the governor of my hometown region, Khabarovsk Krai, when in 2020 the governor of one region became too popular all over Russia because he was trying to fight the corruption in our region, and they were making a lot of videos on YouTube about it. Those videos would get millions of views and people would say, oh, I wish he would be our president, and because of that he was in prison for more than 20 years. And so Medvedev understands he doesn't want to become that popular guy who would be in the future like the enemy, the potential enemy of Putin, who can take the power. To conclude, I want to say that Medvedev used to be always a small shadow of Putin, just always a little friend that goes after Putin wherever he goes and whatever he does and whatever Putin says to him to do. And he used to love the West, he used to eat burgers with Obama, he used to be so happy when receiving a new iPhone 4 from Steve Jobs, from the hands of Steve Jobs, and looking at the new functions of iPhone such as FaceTime, and the person who hosted Linkin Park on the Red Square, which I will remember till the rest of my days, and the person who became a Z-fascist, one of the most vocal Z-fascists of Russia nowadays. And it doesn't even matter why and how he got to this level. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. He just lost his line of behavior. He started to do whatever some person, specifically Putin, would tell him to do. And it doesn't even matter, does he do it because of he's scared of his life or he doesn't want any troubles from Putin. He does it. And we clearly can say that it affected some Russian people. It affected, his words affected some Z people. And of course, we can say that he's a war criminal. To those people who maybe somehow read or heard about his nuclear threats to the whole world, to nuke Germany or to nuke some waters close to UK and to basically drown UK, you guys can, exhale. It's all okay. He has no power, and since now you understand a little bit better about his background, you understand that his words about nuking the whole world doesn't cost a penny. As usual, it was me, Zach the Russian. For those who like the video, smash the like button, subscribe to my channel. Also, thank you so much for those who support me on Patreon. If you want to support me, there are many different ways. There is a PayPal link in the description below. There is a Patreon link. Thank you so much for watching this video. As usual, I wish that this war will end soon. Ukraine will restore its territories and Putin will go to Hague. It was me, Zach the Russian. See ya in the next videos.